Okay, so this nasty spiky brute here is common thorn apple, Datura stramonium. The leaves are all gone off it. I'm told that the frost has hit it in the last week or so, but it has quite a big, soft leaf. Not sure where it's from, the Americas I think, but it's a pretty serious weed. And if you have a look at these fruits, ow! They are producing copious quantities of quite large seed, which is very persistent in the soil. So they'll just sit around waiting for another disturbance, and then they'll be back on quite a large scale. You can see there's a decent sized patch here. On the opposite bank of the river, there's absolutely masses of it. So that's an unfortunate effect.
Do you think that's a fire effect?
Yeah, they do tend to come back post-fire. If you're quick enough, you can just pull them out, but once they've got to this stage, you're pretty well doomed to decades of datura. Just next to it here, we've got another weed. This one is white-tip nightshade, the Solanum chenopodioides. Most of the solanums are post-disturbance things. Some of them just hang around in the landscape all the time at low levels of presence and then flare up after a fire. Some of them you don't see at all unless there's a fire. This one's around all the time, but it's obviously proliferated madly here after the fire. This area here is just an absolute carpet of it. I've got some little fruits here, little black berries, which are probably good tucker for birds. And this one is an exotic, an introduced solanum, but there's lots and lots of native ones as well, and it's quite hard to tell which one's a native and which one's an introduced. So if you're going to start ripping them out, best to get it checked first. A lot of the native ones are covered in spines on the leaves and stems, about 1 centimetre long, and people tend to assume that they're a weed because they're spiny, but that's not true. Most of the spiny ones are native down here. This is an exotic. This is orange-flowered mallow, Modiola caroliniana, and it also comes back profusely after fire. So fireweed, most residents of the Bega Valley are probably pretty familiar with fireweed by now, and unfortunately it's also big on coming up after disturbance. So local resident Robert here tells us that there was a lot of it and it's mostly died off now. Not down in the creek bed, unfortunately, where it's still moist. But yeah, unfortunately it has taken this opportunity to proliferate and distribute a lot of seed around the place. So there'll probably be more next year.
So your advice would be to hand pull it if possible?
Yeah. Yep, if you can bear to. But yeah, it's got such a leg up this year with the drought and the fires that it's getting to the point where I imagine people are going to start giving up on it. There is a native lookalike which doesn't grow in the farming areas. It grows over on the coast, on beaches and headlands. And the way to tell them apart is you've got to look at the green bracts surrounding the flowers. So the bracts are these green things that are enclosing the base of the flower.
Yeah.
So the yellow petals, in inverted commas, both of them have around 13, I think, but the bracts, the fireweed, has around 21. So if you look at one side of that flower head, you should be able to count 10 or 11 bracts, which have a little dark tip on them, which helps count them. On the native one, it has, I think, 13 bracts in total, so 6 or 7 a side. And that's the only way you can tell them apart, really. This thing we're looking at here is a weed called Stinking Roger. It's a summer growing weed. It likes warm conditions and it loves summer rainfall, which unfortunately is what we got this year. After a period of extreme drought, it removed all the other ground cover and the Stinking Roger just went plumb crazy. So there's great swathes of it growing all up and down hillsides and stuff, and road verges just covered in it. And once it starts seeding, you've basically lost the fight, because the moment you touch it, it'll shed seed. So if you're going to do anything to control stinking rods, you really need to get in and start pulling the seedlings out. And if you do wear gloves, I'm not aware that it's poisonous or anything, but it's got a really strong smell, and after you've been working with it for a while, after I've been working with it for a while, I start feeling a bit woozy. It's very smelly stuff. So this here is cobbler's peg, or farmer's friends, so called because its seeds want to follow you home. If you walk through it incautiously, you wind up absolutely covered in these little centimetre long black thingies, which are the seed. Scientific name's Biden's pilosa, and like the stinking roger, it's had a big season because it is a warm weather weed. And we had the rainfall in February, and both of those species just went crazy. So this is the introduced blackberry, and it does have a slightly more complicated leaf with 5 leaflets rather than 3, although there are some leaves on this plant that only have 3 leaflets. Big thorns, curved. Underside of the leaf is pale green, whereas on the native raspberry it was white. The stems are purple, and obviously it gets much, much bigger.
Before the fire, this whole gully, or up the ridge and in the gully, was completely overgrown with honeysuckle, to the point that you couldn't move through it. It was probably sort of a third of the way up the big trees, thick with just thick honeysuckle covering everything.
So honeysuckle will resprout off the roots, so it will probably come back and need to be dealt with. In fact, most climbers, including most of the natives, resprout off the roots after fires, so they're quite quick to come back, along the same sort of lines as sedges and ferns, one of the early bouncer backers. So this is honeysuckle, which is a pernicious weed along riverbanks. It gets little black berries on it, which the birds disperse out of gardens and into moist areas like riverbanks and swamp margins and things, so do not plant it. The juvenile foliage is, the leaves are lobed, but the adult foliage is smoother, like that. And like most vines, it resprouts off the roots after fire, so although it's been temporarily taken out of the landscape here, it will be back. This is inkweed, which is actually a weed, Phytolacca octandra. I think it comes from Central America. Birds spread the fruit around. It has a purple berry. You can see in the middle of the plant here it's sent up a flowering spike, and it started to form some little green fruits, but happily the frost has hit it before it got a chance to ripen those, so it's not going to produce any seed on this site. It is a really common post-disturbance coloniser, and particularly post-fire. And it gets a huge taproot on it, like a parsnip or something, so once they get any sort of size on them, they're very difficult to get out. Yeah, so if you feel like you want to remove inkweed, then you need to remove it while it's still small.